All right. Casino Royale, Chapter 2. Dossier for M. 2 weeks before, this memorandum had gone from Station S of the Secret Service to M, who was then, and is today, head of this adjunct to the British Defense Ministries. To M, from head of S. Subject, a project for the destruction of Monsieur Le Chiffre, alias The Number, Herr Nummer, Herr Ziffer, etc., one of the opposition's chief agents in France and undercover paymaster of the Syndicate des Ouvriers d'Alsace, the communist-controlled trade union in the heavy and transport industries of Alsace, and as we know, an important fifth column in the event of war with Redland. Documentation. Head of Archives, biography of Le Chiffre is attached at Appendix A. Also, Appendix B, a note on Smersh. We have been feeling for some time that Le Chiffre is getting into deep water. In nearly all respects, he is an admirable agent of the USSR, but his gross physical habits and predilections are an Achilles heel of which we have been able to take advantage from time to time. And one of his mistresses is a Eurasian, number 1860, controlled by Station F, who has recently been able to obtain some insight into his private affairs. Briefly, it seems that Le Chiffre is on the brink of a financial crisis. Certain straws in the wind were noticed by 1860, some discreet sales of jewelry, the disposal of a villa at Antibes, and a general tendency to check the loose spending, which had always been a feature in his way of life. Further inquiries were made with the help of our friends of the Dume Bureau, with whom we have been working jointly on this case, and a curious story has come to light. In January 1946, Le Chiffre bought control of a chain of brothels known as the Cordon Juan, operating in Normandy and Brittany. He was foolish enough to employ for this purpose, some 50 million francs of the monies entrusted to him by Leningrad Section 3 for the financing of SODA, the trade union mentioned above. Normally, the Cordon Juan would have proved a most excellent investment. It is possible that Le Chiffre was motivated more by a desire to increase his union funds than by the hope of lining his own pocket, by speculating with his employer's money. However, that may be, it is clear that he could have found many investments more savory than prostitution if he had not been tempted by the byproduct of unlimited women for his personal use. Fate rebuked him with terrifying swiftness. Barely 3 months later, on the 13th of April, there was passed in France law number 46685 entitled, wow, there's a lot of French in this book that I'm going to torture. I don't even know how I'm even going to try this. Entitled Loi tendante à la fermeture des maisons de tolérance et à renforcement de la lutte contre les prostituées. I can't say it. Anyway, when M came to this sentence, he grunted and pressed a switch on the intercom. Head of S? Sir, what the hell does this word mean? He spelt it out. I'm glad I'm not the only one. Pimping, sir. This is not the Berlitz School of Languages, head of S. If you want to show off your knowledge of foreign jawbreakers, be good enough to provide a crib. Better still, write in English. Sorry, sir. M released the switch and turned back to the memorandum. The law, he read, known properly as Le Loi Martyr, closing all houses of ill fame and forbidding the sale of pornographic books and films, knocked the bottom out of his investment, almost overnight. And suddenly, Le Chiffre was faced with a serious deficit in his union funds. In desperation, he turned his open houses into maisons de passe, where clandestine rendezvous could be arranged on the borderline of the law, and he continued to operate one or two cinema bleus underground. But these shifts in no way served to cover his overheads, and all attempts to sell his investment, even at a heavy loss, failed dismally. Meanwhile, the police des mœurs were on his trail, and in a short while, 20 or more of his establishments were closed down. Pardon me? The police were, of course, only interested in this man as a big-time brothel keeper, and it was not until we expressed an interest in his finances that the Dumais Bureau unearthed the parallel dossier which was running with their colleagues of the police department. The significance of the situation became apparent to us and to our French friends, and in the past few months, a veritable rat hunt has been operated by the police after the establishments of the Cordon Juan, with the result that today nothing remains of Le Chiffre's original investment. And any routine inquiry would reveal a deficit of around 50 million francs in the trade union funds, of which he is the treasurer and paymaster. It does not seem that the suspicions of Leningrad have been aroused yet, but unfortunately for Le Chiffre, it is possible that at any rate, Smersh is on the scent. Last week, a high-grade source of Station P reported that a senior official of the efficient organ of Soviet vengeance had left Warsaw for Strasbourg via the eastern sector of Berlin. There is no confirmation of this report from the Dumais Bureau, nor the authorities in Strasbourg, who are reliable and thorough. And there is also no news from Le Chiffre's headquarters there, which we have well covered by a double agent, in addition to 1860. If Le Chiffre knew that Smersh was on his tail, or that they had the smallest suspicion of him, he would have no alternative to committing suicide or attempting to escape. But his present plans suggest that while he is certainly desperate, he does not yet realize that his life may be at stake. It is these rather spectacular plans of his that have suggested to us a counter-operation, which, though risky and unconventional, we submit at the end of this memorandum with confidence. In brief, Le Chiffre plans, we believe, to follow the example of most other desperate till robbers and make good the deficit in his accounts by gambling. The bourse is too slow, so are the various illicit traffics of drugs or rare medicines, such as strepotomycin and cortisone. No racetracks could carry the sort of stakes he will have to play, and if he won, he would more likely be killed than paid off. In any case, we know that he has withdrawn the final 25 million francs from the treasury of his union, and that he has taken a small villa in the neighborhood of Royale, just north of Dieppe, for a week from a fortnight tomorrow. Now it is expected that the casino at Royale will see the highest gambling in Europe this summer. In an effort to wrest the big money from Deauville and Les Touquet, the Société des Bains des Murs de Royale have leased the baccarat and the two top chemin de fer tables to the Marmot et les Syndicats, a group of Egyptian bankers and businessmen, with, it is said, a call on certain royal funds, who have for years been trying to cut in on the profits of Zagrafos and his Greek associates, resulting from their monopoly of the highest French baccarat banks. With the help of discreet publicity, a considerable number of the biggest operators in America and Europe have been encouraged to book at Royale this summer, and it seems possible that this old-fashioned watering place will regain some of the Victorian renown. Be that as it may, it is here that Le Chiffre will, we are confident, endeavor on our after June 15th to make a profit at baccarat of 50 million francs on a working capital of 25 million, and incidentally, save his life. Proposed counter-operation. It would be greatly in the interests of this country and of the other nations of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that this powerful Soviet agent should be ridiculed and destroyed, that his communist trade union should be bankrupt and brought into disrepute, and that this potential fifth column, with a strength of 50,000 capable in time of war of controlling a wide sector of France's northern frontier, should lose faith and cohesion. All this would result if Le Chiffre could be defeated at the tables. NB assassination is pointless. Leningrad would quickly cover up his defalcations and make him into a martyr. We therefore recommend that the finest gambler available to the service should be given the necessary funds and endeavor to outgamble this man. The risks are obvious, and the possible loss to the secret funds is high. But other operations on which large sums have been hazarded have had fewer chances of success, often for a smaller objective. If the decision is unfavorable, the only alternative would be to place our information and our recommendations in the hands of the Dume Bureau or the American colleagues of the Combined Intelligence Agency in Washington. Both of these organizations would doubtless be delighted to take over the scheme. Signed, S. Appendix A. Name, Le Chiffre. Aliases, variations on the words cipher or number in different languages, e.g. Herr Cipher. Origins unknown. First encountered as a displaced person, innate of Dachau DP camp in the U.S. zone of Germany, June 1945, apparently suffering from amnesia and paralysis of the vocal cords, perhaps both feigned. Dumbness succumbed to therapy, but subject continued to claim total loss of memory except associations with Alsace-Lorraine in Strasbourg, whither he was transferred in September 1945 on stateless passport number 305596, adopted the name Le Chiffre, since I am only a number on a passport, no Christian names. Age, about 45. Height, 5 feet 8 inches. Weight, 18 stone. Complexion, very pale, clean shaven. Hair, red-brown ombrose. Eyes, very dark, brown with whites showing all around iris. Small, rather feminine mouth. False teeth of expensive quality. Ears, small, with large lobes, indicating some Jewish blood. Hands small, well-tended, hirsute. Feet small. Racially, subject is probably a mixture of Mediterranean with Prussian or Polish strains. Dresses well and meticulously, generally in dark double-breasted suits. Smokes incessantly caparoles using a denicotinizing holder. At frequent intervals inhales from Benzodrine inhaler. Voice soft and even. Bilingual in French and English. Good German. Traces of Marseille accent. Smiles infrequently. Does not laugh. Habits, mostly expensive, but discreet. Large sexual appetites. Expert driver of fast cars. Adept with small arms and other forms of personal combat, including knives. Carries 3 ear-sharp razor blades in hatband, heel of left shoe and cigarette case. Knowledge of accountancy and mathematics. Fine gambler. Always accompanied by 2 armed guards, well-dressed, 1 French, 1 German. Details available. Comment. A formidable and dangerous agent of the USSR, controlled by Leningrad, Section 3 through Paris. Signed, Archivist. Appendix B. Subject. Smersh. Sources. Own archives and scanty materials made available by Dume Bureau and CIA, Washington. Smersh is a conjunction of 2 Russian words, Schmiertspianum, meaning, roughly, death to spies. Ranks above NWD, formerly AKVD, and is believed to come under the personal direction of Beria. Headquarters, Leningrad. Substation at Moscow. Its task is the elimination of all forms of treachery and backsliding within the various branches of the Soviet Secret Service and secret police at home and abroad. It is the most powerful and feared organization in the USSR and is popularly believed to have never failed in a mission of vengeance. It is thought that Smersh was responsible for the assassination of Trotsky in Mexico on August 22, 1940, and may indeed have made its name with this successful murder after attempts by other Russian individuals and organizations had failed. Smersh was next heard of when Hitler attacked Russia. It was then rapidly expanded to cope with treachery and double agents during the retreat of the Soviet forces in 1941. At that time, it worked as an execution squad for the NKVD, and its present selective mission was not so clearly defined. The organization itself was thoroughly purged after the war, and is now believed to consist of only a few hundred operatives of very high quality, divided into 5 sections. Department 1, in charge of counterintelligence among Soviet organizations at home and abroad. Department 2, operations, including executions. Department 3, administration and finance. Department 4, investigations and legal personnel. Department 5, prosecutions, the section which passes final judgment on all victims. Only one SMERSH operative has come into our hands since the war. Goichev, alias Gerard Jones. He shot Pechora, medical officer at the Yugoslav embassy in Hyde Park, August 7th, 1948. During interrogation, he committed suicide by swallowing a coat button of compressed potassium cyanide. He revealed nothing beyond his membership of SMERSH, of which he was arrogantly boastful. We believe that the following British double agents were victims of SMERSH: Donovan Harthrop Vane, Elizabeth Dumont, Ventor, Mace Severin. For details, see Morgue, Section Q. Conclusion: every effort should be made to improve our knowledge of this very powerful organization and destroy its operatives. Thus concludes Chapter 2. Chapter 3, Number 007. Head of S, the section of the Secret Service concerned with the Soviet Union, was so keen on his plan for the destruction of Lashif, and it was basically his own plan, that he took the memorandum himself and went up to the top floor of the gloomy building overlooking Regent's Park and through the green baize door and along the corridor to the end room. He walked belligerently up to M's chief of staff, a young sapper who had earned his spurs as one of the secretariat to the chiefs of staff committee after having been wounded during a sabotage operation in 1944, and had kept his sense of humor in spite of both experiences. Now look here, Bill. I want to sell something to the chief. Is this a good moment? What do you think, Penny? The chief of staff turned to M's private secretary, who shared the room with him. Miss Moneypenny would have been desirable but for her eyes, which were cool and direct and quizzical. Should be all right. He won a bit of a victory at the FO this morning, and he's not got anyone for the next half an hour. She smiled encouragingly at head of S, whom she liked for himself and for the importance of his section. Well, here's the dope, Bill. He handed over the black folder with a red star, which stood for top secret. And for God's sake, look enthusiastic when you give it to him, and tell him I'll wait here and read a good code book while he's considering it. He may want some details anyway. Anyway, I want to see you two. Don't pester him with nothing else until he's finished. All right, sir, the chief of staff. The chief of staff pressed a switch and leaned forward to the intercom on his desk. Yes? Asked a quiet, flat voice. Head of S has an urgent docket for you, sir. There was a pause. Bring it in, said the voice. The chief of staff released the switch and stood up. Thanks, Bill. I'll be next door, said head of S. The chief of staff crossed his office and went through the double doors leading into M's room. In a moment, he came out, and over the entrance, a small blue light burned the warning that M was not to be disturbed. Later, a triumphant head of S said to his number 2, "We nearly cooked ourselves with that last paragraph." He said it was a subversion and blackmail. He got pretty sharp about it. Anyway, he approves. Says the idea's crazy, but worth trying if the Treasury will play. He thinks they will. He's going to tell them it's a better gamble than the money we're putting into deserting Russian colonels who turned double after a few months' asylum here. And he's longing to get at Lashif anyway. He's got the right man and wants to try him out for the job. Who is it? Asked number 2. One of the double O's. I guess 007. He's tough, and M thinks that there may be trouble with those gunmen of Lashif's. He must be pretty good with the cards, or he wouldn't have sat in the casino in Monte Carlo for 2 months before the war watching that Romanian team work their stuff with the invisible ink in the dark glasses. He and the Dumé bowled them out, and in the end, 007 turned in 1 million francs he had won at Chemy. Good money in those days. James Bond's interview with M had been short. "What about it, Bond?" asked M, when Bond came back into his room after reading head of S's memorandum and after gazing for 10 minutes out of the waiting room window at the distant trees in the park. Bond looked across the desk into the shrewd, clear eyes. "It's very kind of you, sir. I'd like to do it, but I can't promise to win. The odds at baccarat are the best after trente et quarante, evens except for the tiny cagnot. But I might not get a bad run against me and get cleaned out. Play is going to be pretty high. Opening will go up to $500,000, I should think." Bond was stopped by the cold eyes. M knew all this already, knew the odds at baccarat as well as Bond. That was his job, knowing the odds at everything and knowing men, his own and the opposition's. Bond wished he had kept quiet about his misgivings. "He can have a bad run too," said M. "You'll have plenty of capital, up to $25 million, the same as him. We'll start you on 10 and send you another 10 when you've had a look around. You can make the extra 5 yourself." He smiled. "Go over a few days before the big game starts and get your hands in. Have a talk to Q about rooms and trains and any equipment you want. The paymaster will fix the funds. I'm going to ask the Dume to stand by. It's their territory, and as it is, we shall be lucky if they don't kick up rough. I'll try and persuade them to send Mathis. You seem to get on well with him in Monte Carlo on the other casino job, and I'm going to tell Washington because of the NATO and NATO and CIA have got 1 or 2 good men with the joint intelligence chaps there. Anything else?" Bond shook his head. "I'd certainly like to have Mathis, sir." "Well, we'll see. Try and bring it off. We're going to look pretty foolish if you don't. And watch out. This sounds like an amusing job, but I don't think it's going to be. Le Chiffre's a good man. Well, best of luck." "Thank you, sir," said Bond, and went out the door. "Just a minute." Bond turned. "I think I'll keep you covered, Bond. 2 heads are better than 1, and you'll need someone on your communications. I'll think it over. They'll get in touch with you at Royale. You needn't worry. It'll be someone good." Bond would have preferred to work alone, but one didn't argue with M. He left the room, hoping that the man they sent would be loyal to him, and neither stupid, nor worse, still ambitious. Pardon me? So, a lot of words. I guess that's what happens when you read. That was the conclusion of Chapter 2. Sorry, the conclusion of Chapter 3. We are now on to Chapter 4. L'ennemi écoutera, or écoutez. Man, I should maybe get on Duolingo and do some French lessons before tomorrow. I'll study all night long. All right, Chapter 4. As, 2 weeks later, James Bond awoke in his room at the Hotel Splendide, some of this history passed through his mind. He had arrived at Royale in time for luncheon 2 days before. There had been no attempt to contact him, and there had been no flicker of curiosity when he had signed the register, James Bond, Port Maria, Jamaica. M had expressed no interest in his cover. Pardon me? "Once you start to make a set at Le Chiffre, at the tables, you'll have had it," he said. "But wear a cover that will stick with the general public." Bond knew Jamaica well, so he asked to be controlled from there, and to pass as a Jamaican plantocrat whose father had made his pile on tobacco and sugar, and who chose to play it away on the stock markets and in casinos. If inquiries were made, he would quote Charles de Silva of Caffrey's Kingston as his attorney. Charles would make the story stick. Bond had spent the last 2 afternoons and most of the nights at the casino playing complicated progression systems on the even chances at roulette. He made a high banco at chemin de fer whenever he heard one offered. If he lost, he would suivre once, not chase it further if he lost the second time. In this way, he had made some 3 million francs and had given his nerves and card sense a thorough workout. He had got the geography of the casino clear in his mind. Above all, he had been able to observe Le Chiffre at the tables and to note ruefully that he was a faultless and lucky gambler. Bond liked to make a good breakfast. After a cold shower, he sat at the writing table in front of the window. He looked out at the beautiful day and consumed half a pint of iced orange juice, 3 scrambled eggs and bacon, and a double portion of coffee without sugar. He lit his first cigarette, a Balkan and Turkish mixture made for him by Morelands of Grosvenor Street, and watched the small waves lick the long seashore and the fishing fleet from Dieppe string on towards the June heat haze, followed by a paper chase of herring gulls. Pardon me a moment as I flip the record. I lost my bookmark. This will do. He was lost in his thoughts. When the telephone rang, it was the concierge announcing that a director of Radio Stenton was waiting below with the wireless set he had ordered from Paris. "Of course," said Bond. "Send him up." This was the cover fixed by the Dumais Bureau for his liaison man with Bond. Bond watched the door, hoping that it would be Mathis. When Mathis came in, a respectable businessman carrying a large square parcel by its leather handle, Bond smiled broadly and would have greeted him with warmth if Mathis had not frowned and held up his free hand after carefully closing the door. "I have just arrived from Paris, monsieur, and here is the set you asked to have, an approval 5-valve superhet. I think you call it in England, and you should be able to get most of the capitals of Europe from Royale. There are no mountains for 40 miles in any direction." "It sounds all right," said Bond, lifting his eyebrows at this mysterious making. Mathis paid no attention. He placed the set, which he had unwrapped, on the floor beside the unlit panel electric fire below the mantelpiece. "It's just past 11, he said, "and I see that the Compagnons de la Chanson should now be on the medium wave from Rome. They are touring Europe. Let us see what the reception is like. Should be a fair test." He winked. Bond noticed that he had turned the volume onto full, and that the red light indicating the long waveband was illuminated, though the set was still silent. Mathis fiddled at the back of the set. Suddenly, an appalling roar of static filled the small room. Mathis gazed at the set for a few seconds with benevolence, and then turned it off, and his voice was full of dismay. "My dear monsieur, forgive me. Please. Badly tuned." And he again bent to the dials. After a few adjustments, the close harmony of the French came in over the air, and Mathis walked up and clapped Bond very hard on the back and wrung his hand until Bond's finger ached. Bond smiled back at him. "Now, what the hell?" he asked. "My dear friend," Mathis was delighted, "you are blown, up there." He pointed at the ceiling. "At this moment, either Monsieur Muntz or his alleged wife, allegedly bedridden with the grip, is deafened, absolutely deafened, and I hope in agony." He grinned with pleasure at Bond's frown of disbelief. Mathis sat down on the bed and ripped open a packet of Corporal with his thumbnail. Bond waited. Mathis was satisfied with the sensation his words had caused. He became serious. "How it has happened, I don't know. They must have been on to you for several days before you arrived. The opposition is here in real strength. Above you is the Muntz family. He is German. She is from somewhere in Central Europe. Perhaps a Czech. This is an old-fashioned hotel. There was disused chimneys behind those electric fires. Just here." He pointed a few inches above the panel fire. "Just here is suspended a very powerful radio pickup. The wires run up the chimney to behind the Muntz's electric fire, where there's an amplifier. In their room, a wire recorder and a pair of earphones on which the Muntzes listen in turn. That is why Madame Muntz has the grip and takes all her meals in bed, and why Monsieur Muntz has to be constantly at her side instead of enjoying the sunshine and the gambling of this delightful resort. Some of this we knew because in France we were very clever. The rest was confirmed by unscrewing your electric fire a few hours before you got here. Suspiciously, Bond walked over and examined the screws which secured the panel to the wall. Their grooves showed minute scratches. "And now it is time for a little more play acting," said Mathis. He walked over to the radio, which was still transmitting close harmony to its audience of 3, and switched it off. "Are you satisfied, monsieur?" he asked. "You noticed how clearly they come over? And they not a wonderful team? Are they not a wonderful team?" He made a winding motion with his right hand and raised his eyebrows. "They are so good," said Bond, "that I would like to hear the rest of the program." He grinned at the thought of the angry glances which the Muntzes must be exchanging overhead. "The machine itself seems splendid, just what I was looking for to take to Jamaica." Mathis made a sarcastic grimace and switched back to the Rome program. "You and your Jamaica," he said, and sat down again on the bed. Bond frowned at him. "Well, it's no good crying over spilt milk," he said. "We didn't expect that cover to stick for long, but it's worrying that they bowled it out so soon." He searched his mind in vain for a clue. Could the Russians have broken one of our ciphers? If so, he might just as well pack up and go home. He and his job would have been stripped naked. Mathis seemed to read his mind. "It could have been a cipher," he said. "Anyway, we told London at once, and they will have changed them. A pretty flap we caused, I can tell you." He smiled with the satisfaction of a friendly rival. "And now to business, before our good companions run out of breath." Speaking of running out of breath. First of all, he inhaled a thick lungful of caporal. "You will be pleased with your number 2. She is very beautiful." Bond frowned. "Very beautiful indeed." Satisfied with Bond's reaction, Mathis continued. "She has black hair, blue eyes, and splendid, protuberances, back and front," he added. "And she is a wireless expert, which, though sexually less interesting, makes her a perfect employee of Radio Stenton and an assistant to myself in my capacity as a wireless salesman for this rich summer season down here." He grinned. "We are both staying in the hotel, and my assistant will thus be on hand in case your new radio breaks down. All new machines, even French ones, are apt to have teething troubles in the first day or two, and occasionally at night," he added, with an exaggerating wink. That reminds me of the teething problem I had with my own sound system before I started this reading today. And we get some of that trademark 50s sexism here in the description of Bond's number 2. Bond was not amused. "What the hell do they want to send me a woman for?" he said bitterly. "Do they think this is a bloody picnic?" Mathis interrupted. "Calm yourself, my dear James. She is as serious as you could wish, and as cold as an icicle. She speaks French like a native, and knows her job backwards. Her cover's perfect, and I have arranged for her to team up with you quite smoothly. What is more natural than you should pick up on a pretty girl here? As a Jamaican millionaire," he coughed respectfully. "What, with your hot blood and all, you would look naked without one." Bond grunted dubiously. "Any other surprises?" he asked suspiciously. "Nothing very much," answered Mathis. "Le Chiffre is installed in his villa. It's about 10 miles down the coast road. He had his 2 guards with him. They look pretty capable fellows. One of them has been seen visiting a little pension in the town where 3 mysterious and rather subhuman characters checked in 2 days ago. They may be part of the team. Their papers are in order. Stateless Czechs, apparently. But one of our men says the language they talk in their room is Bulgarian. We don't see many of those around. They're mostly used against the Turks and the Yugoslavs. They're stupid but obedient. The Russians use them for simple killings or as fall guys for more complicated ones. Thanks very much. Which is mine to be? Asked Bond. Anything else? No. Come to the bar of the Hermitage before lunch. I'll fix the introduction. Ask her to dinner this evening. Then it will be natural for her to come into the casino with you. I'll be there too, but in the background. I've got one or two good chaps, and we'll keep an eye on you. Oh, and there's an American called Leiter here, staying in the hotel. Felix Leiter. He's the CIA chap from Fontainebleau that London told me to tell you. He looks okay. May come in useful. A torrent of Italian burst from the wireless set on the floor. Mathis switched it off, and they exchanged some phrases about the set and about how Bond should pay for it. Then, with effusive farewells and a final wink, Mathis bowed himself out. Bond sat at the window and gathered his thoughts. Nothing that Mathis had told him was reassuring. He was completely blown and under the radar. really professional surveillance. An attempt might be made to put him away even before he had a chance to pit himself against the chief at the tables. The Russians had no stupid prejudices about murder. And then there was this pest of a girl. He sighed. Women were for recreation. Oh boy. On a job, they got in the way and fogged things up with sex and hurt feelings and all the emotional baggage they carried around. One had to look out for them and take care of them. Bitch, said Bond, and then remembering the Munces, he said, bitch, again, and more loudly, and walked out of the room. Now we move on to Chapter 5. Chapter 5, The Girl from Headquarters. It was 12 o'clock when Bond left the Splendide, and the clock on the Mairie was stumbling through its midday carillon. There was a strong scent of pine and mimosa in the air, in the freshly watered gardens of the casino opposite, interspersed with neat gravel pateras and paths, lent the scene a pretty formalism, more appropriate to ballet than to melodrama. The sun shone, and there was a gaiety and sparkle in the air which seemed to promise well for the new era of fashion and prosperity, for which the little seaside town, after many vicissitudes, was making its gallant bid. Royale, which lies near the mouth of the Somme before the flat coastline soars up from the beaches of southern Picardy to the Brittany cliffs, which run to the Le Havre, had experienced much the same fortunes as Trouville. Royale, without the U, also started as a small fishing village, and its rise to fame as a fashionable watering place during the Second Empire was as meteoric as that of Trouville. But as Deauville killed Trouville, so after a long period of decline did Le Touquet kill Royale. Pardon me? At the turn of the century, when things were going badly for the little seaside town, and when the fashion was to combine pleasure with a cure, a natural spring in the hills behind Royale was discovered to contain enough diluted sulfur to have a beneficent effect on the liver. Since all French people suffer from liver complaints, Royale quickly became Royale and Royale in a torpedo-shaped bottle, grafted itself demurely onto the tail of the mineral water lists and hotels and restaurant cars. It did not long withstand the powerful combines of Vichy and Perrier and Vittel. There came a series of lawsuits. A number of people lost a lot of money, and very soon its sale was again entirely local. Royale fell back on the takings from French and English families during the summer, on its fishing fleet in winter, and on the crumbs which fell to its elegant, dilapidated casino from the tables at Le Touquet. But there was something splendid about the Negresco Baroque of the Casino Royale, a strong whiff of Victorian elegance and luxury, and in 1950, Royale caught the fancy of a syndicate in Paris, which disposed of large funds belonging to a group of expatriate Vicyites. Brighton had been revived since the war. Nice nostalgia. And Nice. Nostalgia for more spacious, golden times might be a source of revenue. The casino was repainted in its original white and gilt, and the rooms decorated in the palest gray with wine-red carpets and curtains. Vast chandeliers were suspended from the ceilings. The gardens were spruced, and the fountains played again. And the two main hotels, the Splendide and the Hermitage, were prinked and furbished and restaffed. Even the small town and viewpoint managed to fix welcoming smiles across their ravaged faces, and the main street became gay with the vitrines of great Paris, jewelers, and courtiers, tempted down for a butterfly season by rent-free sights and lavish promises. There, the Mahomet Ali Syndicate was cajoled into starting a high game in the casino, and the Société des Bains des Murs de Royale felt that now, at last, Les Toquets would have to yield up some of the treasure stolen over the years from its parent plage. Against the background of this luminous and sparkling stage, Bond stood in the sunshine and felt his mission to the incongruous and remote and his dark profession an affront to his fellow actors. He shrugged away the momentary feeling of unease and walked round the back of his hotel and down to the ramp to the garage. Before his rendezvous at the Hermitage, he decided to take his car down the coast road and have a quick look at Le Chiffre's villa, and then drive back by the inland road until it crossed the Route Nationale to Paris. Bond's car was his own personal hobby, one of the last of the 4.5-liter Bentleys in the supercharger by Amherst Villiers. He had bought it almost new in 1933 and had kept it in careful storage through the war. It was still serviced every year, and in London, a former Bentley mechanic who worked in a garage near Bond's Chelsea flat tended it with jealous care. Bond drove it hard and well, with an almost sensual pleasure. It was a battleship gray convertible coupe, which really did convert, and it was capable of touring at 90 with 30 miles an hour in reserve. I'm going to make an aside here. Obviously, we know in the movies Bond's signature car is his Aston Martin DB5, but there is a scene at the beginning of From Russia with Love where he is relaxing with a lovely lady by a riverside, and parked to the side is his classic Bentley, and he takes a call on it. That's, From Russia with Love. Sorry. Back to the book. Bond eased the car out of the garage and up the ramp, and soon the loitering drumbeat of the 2-inch exhaust was echoing down the tree-lined boulevard, through the crowded main street of the little town, and off through the sand dunes to the south. An hour later, Bond walked into the Hermitage bar and chose a table near one of the broad windows. The room was sumptuous with 2 over-masculine trappings, which were, together with briar pipes and wire-haired terriers, spell luxury in France. Everything was brass-studded, leather and polished mahogany. The curtains and carpets were in royal blue. The waiters wore striped waistcoats and green baize aprons. Bond ordered an Americano and examined the sprinkling of overdressed customers, mostly from Paris, he guessed, who sat talking with focus and vivacity, creating that theatrically clubbable atmosphere of Rieur de l'Apéritif. The men were drinking inexhaustible quarter bottles of champagne, the woman dry martinis. Moi, j'adore les dry, a bright-faced girl at the next table said to her companion, too neat in his unseasonable tweeds, who gazed at her with moist brown eyes over the top of an expensive shooting stick from Hermes. Faites avec du Gordons, bien entendu. D'accord, Daisy, mais tes soies en zeste de citron. I apologize to anybody who speaks French out there. Bond's eye was caught by the tall figure of Mathis on the pavement outside. His face turned in animation to a dark-haired girl in gray. His arm was linked in hers, high up above the elbow, and yet there was a lack of intimacy in their appearance, an ironical chill in the girl's profile, which made them seem two separate people rather than a couple. Bond waited for them to come through the street door into the bar, but, for appearance's sake, continued to stare out of the window at passers-by. "But surely it is Monsieur Bond," Mathis's voice behind him was full of surprised delight. Bond appropriately flustered rose to his feet. "Can it be that you are alone? Are you waiting for somebody? May I present my colleague, Mademoiselle Lind? My dear, this is the gentleman from Jamaica with whom I had the pleasure of doing business this morning." Bond inclined himself with a reserved friendliness. "It would be a great pleasure," he addressed himself to the girl. "I am alone. Would you both care to join me?" He pulled out a chair, and while they sat down, he beckoned to a waiter, and despite Mathis's exploitations, insisted on ordering the drinks. A fine Elio for Mathis and a Bacardi for the girl. Mathis and Bond exchanged cheerful talk about the fine weather and the prospects of a revival in the fortunes of Royale. The girl sat silent. She accepted one of Bond's cigarettes, examined it, and then smoked it, appreciatively and without affection, drawing the smoke deeply into her lungs with a little sigh and then exhaling it, casually, through her lips and nostrils. Her movements were economical and precise, and with no trace of self-consciousness. Bond felt her presence strongly. While he and Mathis talked, he turned from time to time towards her, politely including her in the conversation, but adding up the impressions recorded by each glance. Her hair was very black, and she wore it cut square and low on the nape of her neck, framing her face to below the clear and beautiful line of her jaw. Although it was heavy and moved with the movements of her head, she did not constantly pat it back into place, but let it alone. Her eyes were wide apart and deep and blue, and they gazed candidly back at Bond with a touch of ironical disinterest, which to his annoyance he found he would like to shatter roughly. Her skin was lightly suntanned and bore no trace of makeup except on her mouth, which was wide and sensual. Her bare arms and hands had a quality of repose, and the general impression of restraint in her appearance and movements was carried even to her fingernails, which were unpainted and cut short. Round her neck she wore a plain gold chain of white flat links, and on the fourth finger of the right hand a broad topaz ring. Her medium-length dress was of gray sauvage with a square-cut bodice, viscously tight across her fine breasts. The skirt was closely pleated and flowered down from a narrow but not thin waist. She wore a 3-inch hand-stitched black belt. A hand-stitched black sabrece rested on the chair beside her, together with a wide cartwheel hat of gold straw, its crown encircled by a thin black velvet ribbon, which tied at the back in short bow. Her shoes were squared toe of plain black leather. And my other broadcast has just died, meaning an hour has gone by. I apologize for wasting the first 10 minutes or so of this broadcast. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern, and we'll pick up with this chapter of Casino Royale. Thanks again.